She stepped into the boutique just after opening, wearing a soft linen dress and a pair of well-worn sandals. Her hair was pulled back into a simple bun, and the canvas tote on her shoulder had a faint ink stain near the bottom corner. She moved with quiet purpose, eyes scanning the shelves of silk scarves and pastel cardigans with admiration. The store was quiet, its air delicately perfumed with sandalwood and lavender, and the carefully curated displays seemed more like art installations than retail setups. A woman near the counter turned sharply at the sound of the bell above the door. She was tall, poised, and dressed in high-end labels from head to toe. Her name tag read, Clarissa. With a look that flickered briefly between suspicion and disdain, she stepped forward with a brittle smile. "May I help you?" she asked, her tone more curious than warm. The customer smiled. "Yes, thank you. I am looking for a gift. Something elegant but thoughtful." Clarissa's eyes swept over her attire, a handmade dress, no jewelry except a simple gold band, and shoes with faint scuff marks. "What kind of budget are we working with?" she asked, her voice laced with polite skepticism. The customer tilted her head. "I was hoping to find something without worrying too much about that. It is for my sister's engagement." Clarissa nodded slowly, the smile staying in place but tightening around the corners. "We do have some pieces in the back that might be more suitable." She gestured toward a corner rack labeled End-of-Season Specials. The woman's smile did not falter. She stepped toward the main display instead, where a silk-wrapped blouse shimmered in the morning light. "Actually, I was looking at this one. Do you have it in a size small?" Clarissa hesitated, her fingers twitching at her side. "That is part of our limited collection. We usually reserve those pieces for regular clients or by appointment. It is a very high-end item." "I see," the woman said softly, letting her fingers drift away from the fabric. "Could I try it on anyway?" Before Clarissa could answer, another boutique employee, young, clearly new, and less practiced in the boutique's unspoken policies, stepped forward. "Absolutely," she said, already reaching for the hanger. "Let me grab your size from the back." Clarissa's eyes flashed, but she kept her tone even. "Thank you, Emily. I can handle this." Emily paused, glanced from Clarissa to the customer, then stepped back reluctantly. The woman watched the exchange with interest, but said nothing. Clarissa turned back to her with a fixed smile. "Unfortunately, we do not have a small in stock at the moment. You might want to check our website." The woman nodded slowly. "That is disappointing. It is a beautiful piece." Clarissa offered a tight-lipped nod. "It is." There was a pause, long enough to be uncomfortable. Then the woman smiled again, a calm and sincere expression. "Thank you for your help," she said. She turned and walked out of the boutique, her sandals brushing softly against the polished wood floor. Behind her, Clarissa sighed, a quiet puff of relief that she did not know anyone had noticed. Emily did. The next morning, a delivery van that looked comically out of place among the manicured streets of the boutique district rolled to a stop outside the store. It was white, windowless, and bore the logo of a high-end logistics company known for transporting rare artwork and antique furniture. The driver stepped out in a crisp uniform, checked a clipboard, then opened the rear doors. Inside were two men in suits and earpieces, each carrying what appeared to be large, custom-made crates covered in velvet. Clarissa, sipping her morning coffee behind the counter, frowned. Emily stood beside her, her eyebrows raised. The delivery men approached the door, which chimed softly as they entered. One of them looked directly at Clarissa. "We have a delivery for Boutique Fleur. Please confirm the recipient is present." Clarissa blinked. Yes, I manage the store. What is this regarding?" The man handed her a sleek folder embossed with gold lettering. Inside was a formal letter of delivery and a handwritten note that simply read, "For your clientele, let this be a lesson in presentation." It was signed with a name Clarissa did not recognize at first, Eleanor Bennett Collins. She stared at the note, her face draining of color. Emily took a step forward. "Wait, Collins? As in the Collins group? Like Alexander Collins?" Clarissa's lips parted slightly, but no sound came out. The men had already begun unpacking. From the crates emerged a series of luxury items, jewelry, accessories, and exclusive pieces from designers that the boutique had tried to court for years but never been able to stock. Each item bore a label that said, Loaned in Kindness by Eleanor Bennett Collins, a reminder that style has no uniform. Shoppers gathered outside the window, drawn in by the unexpected spectacle. Clarissa tried to compose herself as Richard, the boutique owner, arrived moments later, having been summoned by a flurry of texts. He looked from the display cases to the velvet-lined boxes and then at Clarissa. What on earth happened? Before Clarissa could answer, Emily did. Do you remember the woman who came in yesterday morning? The one Clarissa sent to the back section? Yes, Clarissa said quickly. She was not a serious buyer. She was just looking. She was not just looking, Emily said quietly. She asked for that limited collection blouse. You told her it was not available. I was going to help her, but you... Clarissa turned sharply. This is not the time, Emily. But it was too late. The pieces were all there now, literally and metaphorically. The woman in the linen dress, the polite smile, the refusal to be humiliated, the note, the delivery, the name Collins. Richard ran a hand through his hair. Eleanor Bennett Collins. That is Alexander Collins' wife, is it not? The one who runs that international art initiative? Emily nodded. I saw her in a documentary. She dresses simply on purpose. She said it helps her connect with people who are not usually treated with respect. Clarissa looked like she had just swallowed something bitter. Eleanor sat at home in her sunlit garden, sipping chamomile tea and reading a hardcover copy of a 19th century travel diary. She was not thinking about the boutique, not actively. She had already taken the steps she wanted to take, and that was enough. Her assistant appeared quietly at the garden gate holding a tablet. Eleanor, she said, you have a response from Boutique Fleur. It just came through. Eleanor smiled faintly, setting down the book. Let me see it. The message was short and formal. It thanked her for the generous delivery, expressed appreciation for the pieces, and extended an invitation for her to return to the boutique at her leisure. Eleanor read it slowly, then handed the tablet back. Anything you'd like to say in reply? Her assistant asked. Eleanor thought for a moment, then shook her head. No reply. Let them sit with it. She picked up her tea again and returned to her book, the sun warming her shoulders. The message had been received. That was enough for now, but the story was not over, not yet. The boutique was bustling by noon. Word of the unexpected delivery had spread quickly, and now a mix of curious shoppers, fashion bloggers, and longtime customers filled the space, their eyes wide as they examined the newly displayed luxury pieces. Clarissa moved through the store with forced poise, answering questions she did not have real answers to, smiling at compliments she had not earned. Richard remained in the office for most of the day, glued to the phone, speaking with public relations teams, brand consultants, and a luxury marketing strategist from the Collins Group who had reached out unexpectedly. Emily, meanwhile, worked the floor with genuine enthusiasm, helping customers navigate the new collection, answering questions with the kind of warmth that made people linger. She even noticed a few regulars asking for her by name, something that had never happened before. Outside, a local news station had shown up, camera crew in tow, hoping to catch a glimpse of the story behind the delivery. They had already spoken to a few passers-by, some of whom claimed to have been in the store the previous morning. Their accounts were mixed. Some had noticed the woman being brushed aside, others had not. But the general sentiment was clear. Something unusual and possibly transformative had occurred. One reporter managed to get a brief on-camera statement from Richard as he stepped outside to take a breath. We are grateful for the incredible generosity shown by Eleanor Bennett Collins, he said, his tone polished and professional. And we are reflecting on how we can better serve our community moving forward. Inside, Clarissa watched the interview through the boutique's front window, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Emily glanced at her from across the room but said nothing. It was not the time. Yet. The truth was, Clarissa had not just misjudged a woman. She had misjudged the entire situation, underestimated the weight of presence, the quiet power that someone like Eleanor could carry without needing to announce herself. That miscalculation had not only embarrassed the boutique, but now threatened her own position. She could feel it in the way Richard's eyes avoided hers when they crossed paths, in the way Emily's stock was rising with every smile and compliment from a customer. The energy in the boutique shifted again in the early afternoon, when a man in his early 40s walked through the door. He was tall, clean-shaven, and wore a simple gray suit with no tie, the kind of man who looked effortlessly confident without trying. He made no immediate move to shop. Instead, he scanned the room with calm deliberation before stepping toward the counter. Clarissa's spine straightened as she caught sight of him. Emily's expression brightened. The man stopped a few feet from the register and nodded in polite greeting. "Good afternoon," he said. "My name is Nathaniel Delacour. I represent the Collins family." Clarissa blinked, then offered a smile that was all too eager. "Of course. How may we assist you?" Nathaniel returned the smile with something cooler, more formal. "I am here to retrieve one of the gifted items on behalf of Miss Eleanor. There has been a change in plans." Emily stepped forward, her voice low and courteous. "Which item would that be?" Nathaniel handed over a folded sheet of stationery, embossed with the Collins estate crest. Emily unfolded it and read silently. Her eyebrows rose slightly, but she said nothing as she turned and made her way to the display case near the front window. Clarissa hovered beside Nathaniel, fidgeting with the hem of her sleeve. "I hope there was not a problem with how it was displayed," she said. "We took great care." "It is not about the display," Nathaniel interrupted gently. "It is about intention. Miss Eleanor believes that a specific lesson may have gone unheard." He looked past Clarissa then, toward the window where Emily was carefully removing a rose-colored brooch shaped like a peony. "This was the piece your colleague asked to try on yesterday, the one she was discouraged from seeing." Clarissa flushed, her jaw tightening. "There was a misunderstanding. We simply—" Nathaniel's tone remained even. "Miss Eleanor understands that not every boutique operates on the same values. However, she would prefer that this particular gift not remain where it may be seen as a symbol of charity rather than clarity." He turned then, accepting the brooch from Emily and nodding in thanks. "She asked me to thank you for your time and to suggest that perhaps the lesson is not finished yet." Emily watched him go, the box tucked under his arm, his stride purposeful and unhurried. Clarissa stood still for several long seconds before retreating to the back office, her mind spinning with the implications. The removal of a single item should not have shaken her, but it did, because it was not just any item. It was the one Eleanor had asked to try, the one Clarissa had denied her access to, and now it was gone. Later that evening, after the boutique had closed and the staff had trickled out one by one, Clarissa remained behind. She stood in front of the mirror in the fitting room, holding the store's version of the same wrap blouse Eleanor had admired. It was a sample piece, one size too large, but still elegant. She looked at herself in the mirror, the fabric draped across her shoulders, her expression unreadable. It was not vanity or envy she felt. It was something harder to name: regret, recognition, the quiet unraveling of a belief she had never questioned, that you could tell someone's worth by how they carried themselves, by what they wore, by how much they revealed of their privilege. But Eleanor had revealed nothing and carried herself like someone who had nothing to prove, and that, more than anything, had unsettled her. The next day would bring more changes, new policies, new training sessions, perhaps even new leadership. But in that moment, standing alone in the fitting room, Clarissa began to understand. The message had not been sent through designer labels or dramatic gestures. It had been sent through restraint, through generosity without expectation, and through the quiet, undeniable authority of someone who had been judged and chose not to retaliate, but to enlighten. The boutique entered a week of transformation. Every morning began with required training sessions led by a consultant sent from the Collins Group, a woman named Meredith Ashcroft. She was calm, sharply dressed, and carried herself like someone who had seen every excuse before. Her first session started not with charts or introductions, but with a single question: what does a customer look like? The room fell still. No one wanted to be the first to answer. Meredith let the silence stretch before pacing slowly in front of the room's frosted window. What clothes do they wear? What is the tone of their voice? Do they carry a bag that tells you something? Or are you guessing? Because if you are guessing, you are assuming, and assumptions cost far more than you realize. The atmosphere turned tense. Clarissa sat near the door with her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Emily was closer to the front, notebook in hand. Meredith then played the audio, Without naming anyone, she introduced it simply, "Here is a recording of a first interaction between a customer and a sales associate at this very store. Let us listen together." The room heard the boutique chime. They heard Eleanor's calm, inquisitive voice. They heard Clarissa's, the tone, the distance, the dismissiveness. They heard the polite refusal, the deflection to the discount rack, and the shift when another couple entered the store. They heard the phrase that hung in the air like smoke. "These items are for a certain class of people." No one looked at Clarissa. No one needed to. She kept her eyes fixed on the floor, her jaw clenched as if holding something back. Meredith let the recording end without commentary. "That," she said softly, "is what bias sounds like." After the meeting, the staff slowly left the room in silence. Clarissa remained behind, frozen in her chair. Meredith waited by the wall, giving her space to speak first. Emily lingered at the doorway, watching quietly. Finally, Clarissa let out a shallow breath. "I did not realize how bad it sounded," she said. Meredith gave a small nod. "Most people do not, until they hear it." Clarissa stood, brushing invisible lint from her skirt. "It was not personal," she said, still not meeting anyone's eyes. "It was just the routine. We always try to protect the brand." Meredith smiled, just faintly. "And now you are rewriting what that brand means." That afternoon, the boutique's windows were updated. Gone were the sterile mannequins and icy lighting. In their place were framed photographs, real customers with stories. One was a woman who had saved for months to buy a birthday scarf for herself after surviving breast cancer. Another was a father who brought his daughter every year to pick one small item for her mother. Each story was handwritten and paired with the item that had held meaning. Foot traffic increased. Customers stayed longer. They asked questions. Some just stood and read the stories. Inside, the boutique began to feel different. Not cheaper, not less exclusive, but warmer, more human. Clarissa still worked every shift, but her manner had softened. She smiled more. She asked names. She remembered them. And when Eleanor returned quietly one morning, dressed again in linen and sandals, Clarissa stepped forward. She did not stammer. She did not delay. She looked Eleanor in the eyes and said, "Welcome back to our store. We are honored to have you." And Eleanor, in her quiet way, smiled and replied, "It is good to be here." 2 weeks later, the boutique received a call from an event organizer representing the Collins Foundation. They were hosting a fashion-centered fundraiser for underprivileged youth and were seeking volunteers from retail environments with strong customer experience skills. It was not a direct invitation. In fact, it was more of a call for applications. But Richard recognized the message behind it, and he knew immediately who needed to attend. He approached Clarissa personally. "You should be the one to go," he said quietly, standing outside her office door. "It is a good opportunity." Clarissa did not argue. She only asked when and where. On the morning of the event, she arrived early, wearing a dark blazer and flats, hair pulled into a low chignon. There were no designer labels, no flash, just simple professionalism. The venue was a community center, brightly lit, colorful, full of energy. Dozens of children were buzzing around tables stacked with fabric samples, art supplies, and mannequins. The theme was Design Your Dream, a project where children imagined the clothes they would want to wear if they could wear anything at all. Some were sketching, others gluing rhinestones, some laughing as they draped oversized scarves around their friends like superhero capes. Clarissa was assigned to a table with 6 children, ranging from ages 7 to 12. They looked at her with wide eyes and nervous smiles. "I am Clarissa," she said gently, "and I am not very good at drawing, but I am very good at listening. So tell me what you want to create." One girl raised her hand shyly and said she wanted a dress with wings because she wanted to fly away from hospitals. A boy said he wanted to make a jacket that turned invisible so no one would stare at his hearing aid. Another child said he wanted a shirt that looked like armor. Clarissa blinked and smiled. "Then let us make armor," she said, and for the first time in what felt like years, she stopped thinking about sales targets, about foot traffic, about stock reports. She was just there, helping children pin fabric, laughing as glue stuck to her hands, listening to their hopes and fears without judgment. At one point, She looked across the room and saw Eleanor standing by the entrance, watching the activity with soft eyes. She was not dressed in anything notable, just a cream cardigan and loose pants, but she was unmistakable. Clarissa met her gaze. Eleanor nodded once. It was not approval, it was acknowledgement. Later that afternoon, after the crafts had been cleaned up and the last rhinestone had been secured to the final creation, Clarissa helped a boy pack up his drawing. He told her he wanted to be a designer when he grew up. She told him she believed he could be one. When he smiled, it felt more rewarding than any commission she had ever earned. As she stood by the exit with the other volunteers, Eleanor approached quietly. "Thank you for being here," she said, her tone neutral but sincere. Clarissa took a slow breath. "Thank you for the chance to learn." Eleanor studied her face. "Have you?" Clarissa nodded. "Yes, I have a..." Back at the boutique, things continued to shift. New staff were being trained with a revised handbook, one that included a section on customer dignity. Emily had been promoted to assistant floor manager, and it showed. The energy was different now, less rehearsed, more honest. A woman in a headscarf came in to browse. A man in a wheelchair visited with his partner. No one hovered, no one redirected. They were treated the same as anyone else. People noticed. Reviews online changed tone. One comment read, "Something about this place feels more human now." Another read, "My daughter and I were treated with such kindness. Thank you, Emily." Clarissa read every word. One evening, as she was closing up, she sat on the store's velvet bench and stared out the window at the city. It was a simple moment, but a profound one. She thought about who she had been a month ago, about the version of herself that believed Polish meant power, that appearances defined intention. And then she thought about that day. The linen dress, the tote bag, the calm voice. Eleanor had never raised her tone, never demanded. She had simply acted, with clarity and conviction, and left the rest to unfold. It had worked, because the store had not just changed. She had. And not because she had been humiliated, but because she had been reminded. The kind of person you are when no one is watching, when someone you think does not matter walks through your door, that is who you really are. That was what Eleanor had shown her, not with shame, but with grace. A month after the fundraiser, the boutique received an unexpected invitation. The Collins Foundation was hosting a formal gala in the heart of the city, a charity evening to raise funds for creative education programs in underserved communities. The event was to feature fashion exhibits, student-designed pieces, and keynote speeches from several influential voices in the design and philanthropic worlds. Tucked inside the envelope was a handwritten note addressed to Emily. "Your kindness did not go unnoticed. We would be honored if you and a colleague attended as guests of the foundation." It was signed simply Eleanor. Richard called both Emily and Clarissa into the office and handed them the card. "I want you to represent us," he said without hesitation. "You both earned this." That evening, Emily stood in front of her closet for what felt like hours, finally settling on a navy dress her grandmother had helped her sew in college. Clarissa chose a pale blue wrap dress, not designer, not flashy, but elegant in a quiet way. When they arrived at the venue, the sight took their breath away. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the river. Chandeliers bathed the space in golden light. Tables were set with name cards, each one hand-lettered. Clarissa scanned the room and saw faces she recognized from fashion magazines, charity boards, and press releases. She felt a familiar flutter of nerves, but when she turned, Emily smiled at her and said, "We belong here too." The evening unfolded like a dream. There were speeches that brought people to tears and stories of transformation from children whose lives had been touched by the programs. A runway featured young designers presenting pieces inspired by their lived experiences, clothes that spoke to identity, resilience, and hope. Clarissa and Emily sat beside a woman who had donated the fabric for the children's projects, and a teacher from a small school who had taken a bus 4 hours to attend. Everyone was treated the same. There were no velvet ropes, no exclusive corners, just people. At the midpoint of the evening, Alexander Collins stepped up to the microphone. He spoke not about wealth or industry, but about perspective, about how often people misjudge one another. "My wife," he said, his voice strong and clear, has always believed that the way we treat others, especially those we think have nothing to offer us, is the greatest measure of character. Clarissa felt herself go still. She did not look away. Recently, Alexander continued, we witnessed an incident that reminded us how easily bias can take root even in good people. What impressed me most was not the mistake, but how the aftermath was handled. Gracefully, willingly, honestly. He paused, and in the silence that followed, Eleanor rose from her seat and approached the stage. She wore a flowing gray gown that moved like mist when she walked, and when she stood beside her husband, the room quieted completely. Kindness, she said simply, should never be conditional. The applause that followed Eleanor's words was not thunderous. It was quiet, steady, and sincere, more like a standing heartbeat than a roar. Clarissa remained in her seat, her hands folded on her lap. But her heart raced in a way she could not quite explain. She felt exposed and understood all at once. Emily leaned over and whispered, "That was about you." Clarissa shook her head softly. "No," she replied, "that was about all of us." After the event, as the crowd mingled and champagne glasses were exchanged for warm goodbyes, Eleanor found her way to Clarissa and Emily. She did not announce her presence or wait to be noticed. She simply stood beside them and smiled. "Did you enjoy the evening?" she asked. Emily nodded immediately. "It was beautiful. Thank you for letting us be part of it." Clarissa added, "And thank you for giving us a second chance. Not everyone does that." Eleanor's gaze didn't waver. "People are more than their worst moments," she said, "if they choose to grow from them." She reached into a small clutch and handed Emily a white envelope. Inside is a contact, someone who runs a mentorship program for women in retail. I think you would thrive there. Emily blinked in surprise, her eyes going wide. "Thank you. I do not know what to say." "Just keep being who you are," Eleanor said. Then she turned to Clarissa. "And you," she said softly, "are not who you were a month ago. I hope you see that." Clarissa nodded. "I do, and I hope I never forget it." As the guests departed and the venue lights dimmed, Clarissa walked out into the evening with Emily beside her. The air was crisp and the city was quiet in that in-between hour before midnight. They did not speak much on the ride home, both lost in their own thoughts. Clarissa watched the city lights flicker past the window and thought about all the small ways her world had shifted. Not in grand, cinematic gestures, but in ordinary moments where kindness had been extended when none was owed, where listening had replaced assumption, where presence had been more powerful than pride. The boutique was no longer just a workplace for her. It had become a reflection of something she was learning to believe in. The next morning, she arrived at the boutique earlier than usual. The city was still asleep and the street outside was bathed in soft blue light. She unlocked the door, stepped inside, and walked past the rows of garments and glass displays. She stood in front of the window where a new story had just been framed and mounted. This one featured a nurse who had written about gifting herself a silk scarf after completing her third night shift in a row. Her note read, "I bought it because I deserved something beautiful, even when I did not feel beautiful." Clarissa read it once, then again. She thought about Eleanor, about the boy with the invisible jacket, about Emily, about herself, and then she smiled, genuinely, freely, and began to prepare the store for the day ahead. It was only a week later when something unexpected happened. A courier arrived in the afternoon carrying 3 carefully wrapped boxes and a plain handwritten card. The staff gathered near the register as Clarissa signed for the packages. The card bore only a few words, "A token of gratitude for what you are becoming." Inside the first box was a tailor-made version of the blouse Eleanor had once admired, now crafted with subtle embroidery along the cuffs and a small stitched message inside the hem, "Kindness stitched in." The second box contained a photograph, one taken at the fundraiser event. It showed Clarissa standing beside the table of children, helping one of them pin a fabric wing onto a cardboard outfit. The third box held something smaller, a delicate brooch in the shape of a peony, identical to the one Eleanor had asked to try on the first time she walked into the store. There was no price tag, no receipt, no expectation, just a gift. Clarissa stood for a long time with the items in her hands. Emily came up beside her. "Are you going to wear it?" she asked, motioning to the blouse. Clarissa nodded slowly. "Not today," she said, "but soon." That weekend, she did. She wore it quietly, without announcement, and several customers noticed. One complimented the stitching. Another asked about the message hidden inside. And when Clarissa told them, they smiled, not because it was flashy or rare, but because it meant something. It was real. It had a story, and now so did she. The weeks that followed brought with them a quiet kind of momentum. The boutique, once defined by silence, by perfection, by an unspoken elitism, now echoed with warmth. Children wandered in holding their parents' hands. Elderly women came in simply to browse, and young professionals who once only peered through the window now stepped inside and stayed. Each of them was greeted without judgment, offered help without scrutiny, and treated with the kind of care that used to be reserved only for those who fit a certain image. But now, the image had changed. Clarissa had changed. She had not become softer. If anything, she had become clearer. There was strength in how she moved through the store now, not to command attention, but to offer it to others, to see the people she might have once overlooked. Emily flourished in her new role. She organized a small corner in the boutique where customer stories were rotated weekly. She placed a notebook beside a vase of fresh flowers and encouraged visitors to write about the moment they first felt seen. Some stories were light-hearted, a pair of earrings bought to celebrate a new haircut. Others were deeper, a wallet purchased on the day someone left an unhealthy relationship. Each one added something to the walls, something you could not price, something no marketing strategy could ever invent. Kindness had become the currency of the boutique, and business, surprisingly or perhaps not surprisingly, was thriving. One Tuesday afternoon, Clarissa was arranging scarves near the front window when a young woman entered. She looked uncertain, her clothes casual and her shoes slightly dusty, as though she had walked a long way. She hesitated near the doorway. Clarissa noticed her immediately. "Welcome," she said, with no hint of assumption in her voice. "Can I help you find anything?" The woman looked relieved and smiled shyly. "I am just looking. I have a job interview tomorrow, and I do not usually shop in places like this." Clarissa stepped closer, not with sales energy, but with genuine interest. "That sounds exciting. What kind of job?" "Receptionist," the woman said. "At a medical clinic." Clarissa nodded. "Important work. Would you like help choosing something that feels like you, but polished?" The woman nodded, eyes still cautious. Clarissa guided her through a few racks, letting her touch the fabrics, drape the pieces over her shoulder. She did not push. She listened. They settled on a tailored blouse with soft lines and a pale green color that brought warmth to her face. As she walked to the counter, the woman hesitated. "I think I might be a little short on the total," she said, checking the tag, but Clarissa stopped her gently. "Let me cover the difference," she said. "It is not a promotion. It is just a gesture." The woman blinked, touched her hand to her chest. "Why?" Clarissa smiled. "Because someone once reminded me that how we treat people matters most when we think no one is watching." The woman smiled. "Then I hope they know they made a difference." Clarissa nodded. "They do." That evening, after the store had closed, Clarissa stayed behind to tidy up. She watered the small orchid near the register, refolded a few items near the front, and paused in front of the story wall. A new entry had appeared that day, one she had not seen until now. Written in large looping handwriting, it read, "Today I was treated like a person, not a price tag. I will not forget it." Clarissa stared at the message for a moment, her eyes warming, then walked to the back of the store and turned off the lights one by one. The city outside was calm. The boutique stood lit only by the glow of the street lamps. She lingered for a moment at the door before stepping outside, locking it behind her, and heading home. Meanwhile, at the Collins estate, Eleanor sat in her study, reading letters from the last benefit event. Her assistant entered with a package. "From the boutique," she said, placing it gently on the table. Eleanor opened it to find a letter and a photograph. The letter, written in careful handwriting, read, "We thought you might like to see what you helped create." The photo was of the story wall, surrounded by customers, each one reading, sharing, connecting. Eleanor smiled softly and traced her fingers over the image. Alexander entered the room, setting his phone aside. "Good day?" he asked. She nodded. "A meaningful one." He looked at the photo over her shoulder and said nothing. He did not have to. The following month, the boutique hosted its first community showcase, an idea that Emily had proposed and that Clarissa had championed without hesitation. The concept was simple: invite local artists, designers, and crafters to share space in the boutique for a day, to display their work, tell their stories, and meet customers. The response was overwhelming. On the day of the event, the boutique overflowed with life. Children sat on the floor drawing, artists answered questions about their work, and the scent of handmade candles filled the air. Clarissa moved through the crowd not as a gatekeeper, but as a guide. Eleanor arrived just before noon. She stood near the entrance for a long moment, watching it all. Emily spotted her first and brought her a cup of tea from the refreshment table. "You helped make this happen," she said. Eleanor shook her head. "You did." Clarissa approached them and smiled. "I am glad you came." Eleanor gestured to the space. "It is beautiful." Clarissa nodded. "It is honest, and that is even better." Eleanor laughed, soft and genuine. "I never thought a single visit would lead to all of this." "Neither did I," Clarissa said. "But it did, because you acted with purpose, not pride." Eleanor took a long sip of tea. "We all need reminders sometimes of what really matters." Clarissa glanced around the room. "And we need to stop assuming that we know who people are based on what they carry or how they dress." Eleanor met her gaze. "You learned the lesson well." The showcase ended with a round of applause and shared embraces. One artist cried softly when a customer told her that her quilt reminded her of her grandmother. A boy who had painted his dreams on canvas got his first sale. And Clarissa, once proud, once guarded, stood in the center of it all, no longer afraid of being changed. That night, as she closed the boutique with Emily by her side, she looked up at the sign above the door. It had not changed, but what it stood for had. The name of the store meant something now. Not just elegance, not just luxury, but openness, respect, growth, and at its heart, kindness. 1 week after the community showcase, a letter arrived at the boutique addressed to Clarissa. It came not by courier or branded envelope, but in a simple handwritten form. The return address was from a retirement home across town. Inside was a note written in neat cursive by a woman named Marianne, who had visited the boutique with her granddaughter during the showcase. She wrote, "I wanted to thank you, not for what I purchased, but for what I felt. I have not been in a store like yours in decades, not since before my knees started protesting every step. But my granddaughter insisted, and I am glad she did. No one rushed us. No one judged my slow pace or my cane. You simply treated us like we mattered. I left with a scarf, yes, but I also left with dignity. And at my age, that means more than you know." Clarissa read the letter 3 times. Then she pinned it on the wall behind the counter, not beside the usual customer photos, but in a small corner she labeled "Reminders." Over the next few days, that section grew. A thank you card from a student who bought a tie for his graduation interview. A poem from a mother who used to walk by the boutique every day but never felt welcome until she met Emily. A sketch from a boy who had drawn his family as superheroes with boutique power stitched onto their capes. Clarissa looked at that wall often, not as decoration, but as truth. Richard noticed the difference too. In a meeting with his investors, he had been asked if the boutique's shift in direction had been deliberate. He paused before answering. "It was not," he admitted, "but it was necessary, and now it is defining us in the best way." One of the investors had asked if the inclusive changes were sustainable. Richard had smiled. "Kindness is always sustainable," he said. "It just requires commitment." Meanwhile, Eleanor and Alexander continued their work behind the scenes. They never used the boutique in press releases, never tried to make a media moment out of it, but they did refer to it often in private meetings, calling it a living case study in transformation. Eleanor once said to a group of nonprofit leaders, "We changed nothing about the boutique's exterior, not its brand, not its square footage, but by changing the interior experience, how people are received, how they are heard, we changed everything." She paused before adding, It reminds us that the soul of any place is not the building. It is the behavior inside it. That sentiment echoed again and again through Eleanor's speeches, through Alexander's quiet nods of support, and through the boutique's day-to-day rhythm. One afternoon, a young intern named Zara joined the staff. She was nervous on her first day, barely speaking above a whisper. Clarissa introduced her not as the new intern, but as our newest voice. Within a week, Zara had reorganized the accessories wall with a layout that encouraged more customer interaction. Emily started calling it Zara's Zone, and Clarissa made sure to tell her, "You made it better. Do not be afraid to take up space here." It was small this moment, but it mattered. Another day, a customer approached the counter and said, "I do not have much to spend, but I was told this place makes people feel like $1 million." Clarissa laughed gently. "Whoever told you that gave us a high bar to meet." The customer smiled. "Then thank you for not making me feel small." Clarissa had paused, not because she was caught off guard, but because it was working. The culture, the change, the lesson. The truth was, no delivery had ever been more valuable than the one that arrived on that quiet morning weeks ago. Not because of what was in the boxes, but because of what they carried. A message, a mirror, a challenge, and the store had answered. Not with noise, but with change. Real change. The kind you feel before you see. The kind that does not fade. The kind that begins with one simple woman and grows into something unforgettable. Some stories begin with misunderstanding, with someone being dismissed, overlooked, told they do not belong. But how they end? That depends on what we choose to do next. Clarissa chose to listen. Emily chose to speak up. Eleanor chose to act. And together, they created a space where everyone was welcome, not just to buy, but to be seen. If this story resonated with you, we invite you to join our community of story lovers by subscribing below. Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever been misjudged based on how you looked, or surprised someone who thought they already knew your worth? Your story might inspire someone else to look a little closer, to ask instead of assume, to treat others with care, not caution. Because the truth is simple. True value is not something you can wear. It is something you live. And the most expensive thing you can ever give someone is your kindness. We will see you in our next story, where another powerful reminder is waiting. Until then, keep watching, keep listening, and most of all, keep being kind.